This episode is brought to you by the Playbase Autism and Behavioral Support. If you're looking for support for an early intervention for your child, please check out the Playbase at Instagram and Facebook in multiple locations in Canada and the United States.
Melissa Lantsman, thank you so much for being on Can't Shovel Hurricanes, Canadian edition.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
It is been a long time in the making for us to actually sit down and have a proper conversation like this with mics in front of us, and we've had a lot of banter going back and forth.
That's right.
You are an extremely important powerhouse of an individual that is now fighting the fight for people like myself. And unfortunately, the sample size of, what I call the demographic, the exodus from Canada, of people moving to quote unquote conservative states into the United States. And there are many other places where people are exiting. They're people that, whose families came down for what was the Canadian dream. And I believe in my bones, so much so that I was willing to uproot my entire family and successful businesses out of the country, because I don't believe the pathway of where Canada is where it was, and the Canada I grew up in doesn't exist anymore.
Well, I don't disagree with you that the Canada that you knew isn't there, but I do disagree with you in saying I believe it in my bones that this is the best country in the world. And it was the best country in the world before, the last 8 years before Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister. And it is going to be the best country in the world well after he's gone.
I hope to God that what you're saying will inevitably be true. I believe it will be true. I want a path back if I decided to do that, because the journey has been a challenging one. But we can talk eye level, not just about Canada, how much it's changed, and you have a perspective on the political front lines. But you yourself have a fascinating story, because your parents, your family, all came down here with the intent of improving their lives and believing that Canada is the best place for them, for you, for your family, to raise a family,
sure,
to establish businesses, that dream. And I don't think enough is talked about your journey. So,
well, my journey is like so many others, a little bit like yours and included. My parents came here in the mid 1970s from the former Soviet Union. They're from Odessa.
Do they speak Ukrainian?
No, Russian, and I speak Russian. I understand better than I speak, but they'll speak Russian at me.
Really?
Yeah, they do.
Can you read it right?
Poorly.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, poorly, but I can make it work. My mom and dad came here with my brother in tow, and my dad is the story like so many, and the story that continues today. He was an uncredentialed engineer who ended up in the cab business, driving taxi, dispatching. Eventually having a business from it, and then small businesses there following after. But he put my mom through school, and at the time when he came, the difference, and there's a huge difference between if you came then and you did what he did versus if you come now. And when he came here, he was able to work hard, get ahead, buy a house in a safe neighborhood, and give his family a better life than the one that he ran away from, including putting my mom through post-secondary education here. And if you come here today and you are an uncredentialed, whatever you are, and you're driving a cab, or let's say today you're driving an Uber, you cannot buy a house in a safe neighborhood to give your family the promise of Canada. You're probably living in that Uber. And that's the saddest thing about what happened, what was before and what is now. And I come from that. And I watched it, and I watched the sacrifices. And my story, again, is not different than many, many other Canadians who watch their parents hustle day in and day out so that you can go from the front seat of a taxi to the front row of Parliament Hill in one generation.
there's probably many reasons why that statement is 100% correct. But when you grew up, did you feel like you went without things?
No, it's funny. You look at those around you, and there's a sort of like keeping up with the Jones or comparison that you kind of live your daily life in. But I never wanted for anything. We had family dinners, and I went to great schools, and I got the opportunity to go to whatever university I wanted, and I went to summer camp, and I did programs, and we had dinner at 6 p.m. Together, and conversations were had, and I had rollerblades and bicycles, and a couple new pairs of shoes every year, which I was very fond of. But I never wanted for anything because I never knew any different. I just knew that they worked hard, and I got the life that I got right here in Thornhill.
So it's fair to say that your parents, had an enormous amount of gratitude for Canada, the opportunities that it presented for them so they can give a better life to their kids.
Sure.
Because, for people that don't know, and like leaving the former Soviet Union, my parents left from a place called Moldova, which is, somewhat comparable, I would say, to what Odessa is, right? It's like, first of all, anti-Semitism was prevalent, so that was a major issue. And, we are going to touch about on this podcast. But there weren't the opportunities were so limited that it was impossible, right? And coming here with literally, that story of like $100 in the pocket, and
uphill, no shoes, both ways.
Yeah, right. But they actually did that. Like they didn't speak the language, they didn't understand the culture, because their why and their belief in the belief system in Canada was so strong that they're like, we can do it. Everybody makes it here. We have so much opportunity. There's so much value in living here. From our healthcare to the education to real estate prices, and I mean, what year did your parents move down?
My parents came in 74.
Okay,
so or early on. I used to tell this. My late mother, who I speak about still in the present because I just haven't come to terms with that. But my late mother, I used to say, "Well, Mom, you're like this prim and proper like Russian lady." I know Russian. I'm not Russian. We're Canadians. Wow. And she used to correct me all the time and made sure that I was, even from our names, like we've got English names, that was important to them. It was important for her to make sure that I knew both official languages, putting me in French education. It was important to ensure that I did things that Canadian kids did, because this was her new life and she wasn't ever looking back. And she never went back once in her life.
You like my wife, you actually went to the same high school in Langstaff.
That's right.
And both, because speaking French is an important part of being a Canadian. It's an integral part. Her family is also from the former Soviet Union, and they escaped. Like that's how they look at it, and they're like, "No, I am a Canadian.
That's
I'm
right.
not Russian." That's right? And I get that. But fast forward to today. Can you imagine your parents making that journey down here and being able to just support and sustain life at its basic core? I mean, do you know by any chance, did your parents buy a house?
They did, yeah. They bought a house here in the earliest, years of when Thornhill was built.
So by the way, Melissa made me fly down, and it's an honor and a privilege to do it, because she was the only way I will do a podcast is on my soil, and she's dead on right. And I'm still a Canadian. I hope to, I hope to one day have a path for my kids to still be Canadian in the future, because I want to be able to come back. But do you know what they paid for that house?
Yeah, it was about their first house was $130. So yeah, so $130,000 in the other side of Thornhill that used to be part of the riding, that sort of Leslie area, and then right here around the corner from where we're sitting in sort of Thornhill proper, $180. So $180,000 bought you a house, and of course nobody can do that today. Right. And over the last 8 years, we've seen housing prices double, we've seen rent double, we've seen mortgage payments double, rate rises out of control, food, grocery, gas, all inflated because of the government's insane spending.
It is psychotic to hear of like what's happened. There's been 10 rate hikes over the last
2 years.
That just, if you put that into context, that is a shock to the system by any stretch. And most people are locked into variable rate mortgages, meaning they're either coming due, and if they were in fixed rate mortgages, they're coming due. But the variable rate mortgages, I'm having this conversation almost every single day where people are like, oh my God, I'm upside down X number of dollars and going. And every time I'm going to the grocery store, it's costing me way more to buy groceries and then putting my kids through school because that went up significantly. Like, Canadians are not only leaving because they don't see any more opportunity, they just can't afford to live here anymore. And they don't see the value and purpose as to why they should be trying to struggle that much more to stay here. So the listeners of the podcast, and originally was supposed to be a resource for people who are moving down south, to give them a path and context for everything that they need to know. I'm a part of a group. There's a couple of Facebook groups and there's a couple of phone groups called Canadians Abroad and Canadians Investing. And I'm on WhatsApp groups with Thornhill families that have moved down that are all singing the same tune. And they all are established professionals that have been impacted in many different ways. Specifically, what happened was COVID lit the fuse. And your businesses took a major hit. If you had a small business, and I had a periphery business that was shut down because of government imposed mandates, because of the vaccine mandates. So I owned a fitness studio. I opened it up 3 months before our first official lockdown, which was in March of 2020. I opened up in December of 2019. I had to shut it down and walk away from it. There was a lot of hypocrisy. I mean, we have the opportunity to look at COVID and how it was handled in hindsight. But given what we know now, and if you were in charge, how would you have handled COVID?
Well, look, I mean, hindsight is 2020, and you don't know what people were being told at the time, and you can only imagine that it was, it was sort of the level of crazy was very high because the decisions were crazy and they didn't make sense, and we saw massive shutdowns of
what decision
our economy.
didn't make sense?
Look. I'm no fan of lockdowns. That's not the way that we run an economy. That's not the way necessarily, and particularly in hindsight, do you keep people safe. We had a prime minister in this country who used division between people to make policy. And I don't think that it was made based necessarily on science or what they knew at the time. It was there to divide people who believed something other than what the government told you to believe. And I think if we don't look at everything, every decision that we had made as a country, not we, but that Canada made as a country, and if we don't look at that in the next pandemic and do just about everything differently, then we would have learned nothing at all. But I want to go back to a specific point that you raised in terms of, all of those people leaving. That is the story that you're hearing more and more of, and that's the story that should be unacceptable to every single person that ever puts their name on a ballot, that ever supports a government. We should not have smart, bright, talented entrepreneurs, people who are risk takers, people who would build this economy as the economy of the future, leaving to settle in another country. And if that's, if that's a product of COVID, or if that's a product of the economic policy, which I believe that it probably is, then we got to do a broad rethink of how we're going to build this country as one that people want to stay in, strive in, and thrive in.
All right, so let's look at that as a plan of action, because statistically you're dead on. If you look at the stats of immigrants leaving Canada since 2000, there was a slight decline. There was a slight increase from 2000 to about 2010, and then it sort of stabilized at the same sort of figure, and it dipped after 2015. Now, fast forward to 2022, 2021, you've seen 25% increase year over year, and 23 stats haven't come out. And I think a lot of that has to do with the backlog of a queue on the visa front. Specifically, I'm talking about the United States. And those numbers are exponential almost. If you're looking at them at a graph from year over year, starting from like 2019, just constant. And there was no real reason in 2019 for people to leave. And then 2020 lockdown, 2021 lockdown, 2022. And now you're seeing that carry forward after things have supposedly opened up. What would be your plan of action? A, to bring people back, and then more importantly, to keep them there.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there is a number of different policy areas that need a complete remake. And I think in the immediate term, we've got to get inflation under control in this country. We've got to make it a country where there is a tax incentive for people to do business here, start businesses here, live here. We pay too much tax in this country. And I don't think there's anybody who disagrees with that. Well, I'm sure there's a few people that disagree with that, but I think the vast majority of people would believe that we have a tax burden that is unsustainable. We have a government that spends more than it takes in every single year, with absolutely no plan to ever balance the books. That's driving inflation. That's driving the interest rates rise. We're going to start with, first of all, making your paychecks more powerful, and that's to stop the inflationary. We're going to stop the inflationary spending and get our books under control. We're going to kill the carbon tax, and I hope that it's the first thing in the first hour when Pierre Poilievre becomes the Prime Minister that he does, because it is the worst of the taxes, because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't help the environment. We haven't met a single environmental target as a result of it. And by the end of this tax scheme that they have, you're going to pay 61 cents more a liter of gas. And when you're paying 61 cents more a liter of gas, it increases the price of every single thing that you want, and every single thing that you need, and every single place that you go, and every single thing that you do.
Why do you think the government is doing this the way it stands? Because it doesn't make any sense on any front.
You know, you want the scientific term? I think it's it's the cuckoo bananas tax, because it doesn't make any sense, and it is ideologically driven, and that's the only reason for it. Because if you had a tax that let's say lowered emissions in this country, well, then they would have an argument to continue on the cuckoo bananas tax. But you don't. In fact, the only time emissions have gone down in this country is when we had a full-scale lockdown of the country. Now, that's not a sustainable environmental policy. So, I think it's an ideological commitment to doing something, even knowing that it doesn't work. And that's the first thing. That's the first thing we're going to do in order to make life more affordable here.
I'm going to tell you my version of things. You're privy at things at a much higher level, and you're hopefully, and I believe this in my bones, are going to institute a lot of change on a lot of things that are driving people out. I personally think that this exodus that is happening has so much incentivized our current government. And when I talk about the current government, I'm not just talking about Trudeau and the gaslighting that I see from him. The other day, I watched a video about him saying that he didn't force any lockdowns. Really? I got a couple of businesses that'll show you otherwise. But the coalition that you have between the NDP and our Liberal government, to me, seems like they are so much incentivized to have people like myself and the groups of people that I belong to that I would never vote for these people ever again. They want them to leave. They want them to forget about Canada, and they want to fill the void with people who are like-minded for them, who people don't want to do any of their own thinking. And they're going to lose the entrepreneurs. They're going to lose those risk takers. They're going to lose those people that are the foundation of any true democracy, which I don't believe no longer exists. And that's evident through like Bill C-18 and C-11 and some of these things that are like, they used to be small encroachments, but are now massive encroachments.
Sure.
And
ones that we've never seen before in this country.
And once the overstep has become so evident, you no longer really have the opportunity to send your message out. Podcasts like this have now become the medium of choice for people that have an opinion that's contrary to the government. And nothing is more evident when I speak to a Canadian or an American of how scared a Canadian is to talk because they're afraid to lose their jobs, they're afraid to get canceled, versus an American who's like, you know what, I'm going to say what I want to say, and I'm allowed to say, and if you don't like it, that's okay, right? But we're now seeing this, I believe, incentivized policy to push people out because they wouldn't vote for the current government, and that's not democracy.
Yeah, look, there's no question that the cancel culture, the woke ideology has permeated all of the institutions. It's our school boards, it's our unions, it's frankly our own government here in Canada. And a bright young guy who's going to be the next prime minister said it best: once you go woke, you go broke as a country, and it's true. You're seeing, you're seeing, look, whether it's a mass exodus, we are seeing a really concerning thing here. And that our productivity, that measure of GDP per capita, the thing that measures our standard of living compared to, let's say, our neighbor in the States. Well, we're sort of on this trajectory that's going down. And we've got the lowest growth rate of any advanced economy, not just the G7, not just the thing that everybody compares us to all the time in terms of stats, of any advanced economy. And we are the lowest over the next 30 years. So this is going to take a visionary, leader to make this change, to get Canadians to back up to par on a standard of living in comparison to our neighbors, and make it attractive to work here, to play here, to raise a family here, in a place where you're not afraid to do that, and government doesn't have its sticky fingers in all of in all of the messages on all of the websites. And you do have an opposition here fighting that every day. And you said something at the beginning of this. I'm not privy to any more information than anybody else. I'm living in this country. I see it, and I've been bestowed with the responsibility from the people in Thornhill to speak up against what I think is eroding our country, and that's what we do every day. And I think that we will be successful in turning the tide to have the next generation, your kids, return to Canada and add to our productivity.
I want to press you on it because what I find is removing things like the carbon tax, great. It'll make a difference, but it is certainly just a drop in the bucket of a lot of things that happen.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Why did you get into politics?
I take it's interesting. I use my parents as the example of people that I look up to in terms of, doing something, building something. I've always been part of a community that has done something and built something. Like, there's incredible things built right here, like under our noses, probably in the basements of some of the houses around here. And I wanted to be part of making sure, and if you can't build something yourself, create the environment where people can thrive. And I went into politics because I thought that it was you can make a change. You can make the biggest amount of change. And I wanted the platform to do that. And so I humbly asked everybody to put a check mark next to my name, and they've allowed me to do that for a certain amount of time. And that's what I'm doing now. But why did I go into it? Because I think it matters. And I think that this is the best country in the world, and I want to make sure that it continues to be that.
The weight of the word that is now on the Conservative Party shoulder is way more than any other political frontier than I've seen since I moved to Canada when I was 8 years old. I think there's just so much on your shoulders now.
No pressure, eh?
No pressure. It's actually all the pressure.
It's not on our shoulders. It is, we are going to be the conduit, and we are led by I think somebody that has a clear vision. But it's important for everybody in the country. And I think it's important that you're doing podcasts like this one. And I think it's important that we're getting the message out to people to say, look, this place is broken and we can fix it.
What do you think will happen if we've got another term of the current government structure? Where do you see Canada 5 years from today?
Well, I don't think about losing.
No, I don't think that you should put that out there in the universe, because everything in my bones and everything I believe in. And I have to clarify a little bit that many people, when I said that I'm going to be doing a podcast with you, understanding my point of view, have said to me, specifically Canadians, said, you have to be careful about what you say. You have to be careful about what you ask. Why? Because I know people that have lost their livelihoods and careers, both in the medical sphere and otherwise, that have had positions that were contrary to the government, that have been canceled, that have lost their livelihood, that have had a lot of nefarious things happen to them. Let's talk about the truckers. I have this one case that is probably the most grotesque overreach of government that I've ever seen in my entire life. She is a sweet, talented small business owner that creates creative cakes. She creates these beautiful cakes for birthdays and occasions.
Cool.
And she contributed it to the GoFundMe to the truckers. Her accounts were frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. Never mind that. Forget about the accounts being frozen, as much as like that's not diminishing it. The fear.
No, that's actually it is the most egregious violation
Couldn't agree with you
of the government, when the government has made a conscious decision to freeze bank accounts without clear evidence that those bank accounts were used for anything nefarious. I mean, we've got cases, I think, of terrorism where you would want that power. But when you can do it to ordinary citizens with no evidence at all, and you can have a minister stand up there and say that he was told to put down the hammer with the Emergencies Act, and he outright lied to the Canadian people. Now he's a former minister now, but the fact that everybody bought into that narrative, that everybody pushed that narrative, I think it was the most egregious violation of government that I've ever seen in my lifetime. So it's not just a little thing.
No, I agree. Where I was going with that is that the fear that it instilled in everybody around her, family, friends around, they're scared of the government now. I never grew up in an environment like that. Your parents did, yeah. Yeah, we came from that. So when I had told my mother, my father passed right before. I didn't know that your mom passed as well. Is that
during COVID? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I mean, I couldn't imagine the decisions you probably had to make between lockdowns and seeing her and stuff like that. I don't know what that was like.
Yeah, we made the decision based on what our family was comfortable, and we saw each other. I'm
so proud of you.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody makes the right decisions for them. And I don't regret that. I got amazing few months with my mother in a really adult kind of way. When a parent is passing, and I think my mom was too young, and I think I'm too young to lose a parent. But you have these conversations that you would never otherwise have, like where, they tell you all of the things. When you asked me, did you ever want for anything? And I told you, no, I had no idea what their struggle was like when they were here. I was shielded from it. I was too young. Maybe I didn't care. They told me, she told me all of that in her last number of months. And you couldn't trade that for anything in the world, to know what things were really like and not just, what you thought they were like.
I would have been so upset if I didn't get a chance to see my father. He checked out right before our first lockdown, but I had this conversation with my family so many times where I had newborns in the house. Businesses just went belly up.
Sure.
It was not my primary business, but then my father was in his late stages of cancer, and I would have had to make a decision whether I get to see my kids or I get to see my dad. And at the risk of, I mean, at the time we still didn't know what the COVID was, so we were given the opportunity. But knowing what we know now, and I wouldn't have had to see my dad in his late stages and have those moments like you just described with your mother. And I would have had to live with that for the rest of my life. The government we have today, like, I find reprehensible on a good day, but I would have never forgiven it on that scale.
Yeah, that's where the anger comes in, and you saw a lot of that with many of the different populations. Like, whatever choices you make, that's your choices. I never want to hear about anybody's medical choices. Like, I genuinely do not care. Do what you think you should be doing, and I never want to have a conversation about like whether you got the flu shot this year. Like, just do your thing.
You don't, eh?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
You sure in government?
But I'm still angry about it in my own right. And I didn't lose my job, and I didn't lose my livelihood. And, some in the family decided to get the vaccine, and maybe some didn't. And we didn't fight about it, because, that just wasn't.
That was a choice.
It was a choice. It was always a choice in our family. And the thing that I'm angry about is that I had to do a funeral during COVID with this, like, outside, 10 people, 20
Over
people,
Zoom.
depending on, and the Zoom component. And it's just, knowing what you know now, and frankly, even what you knew then, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I still feel anger about it. And that is just it's not a small thing in my life, but it is a negligible thing compared to those who have lost their jobs, who continue to not be able to work in certain settings, based on a vaccine policy that is long ago. Between all of the application of rules, I can understand why people are angry. I'm going to remind people of one thing. There was this clip. The Prime Minister kind of comes out in front of his house or cottage or whatever every day to give the country the update on COVID. Right. And, one of the journalists asks, like, well, you're spending a lot of money. Like, eventually, aren't interest rates? And then he sort of looks and he says, well, interest rates are at a historic low, Glenn. It was a guy named Glenn who asked the question. And what you are seeing now is that anger amplified by bad decision making of money spent, money that we didn't have, money that was printed, that people are paying for now. So the anger hasn't dissipated. In fact, it's just resurfaced in different ways where families cannot get by.
The struggle is so real. And it almost looks at like this Robin Hood mentality of, steal from the rich, whatever the rich is, and give to the poor. And we as a government will decide how to allocate those resources.
That's right.
In every single aspect. That de-incentivizes anybody who's willing to take any sort of business risk. I know for me, I said to my wife, I will not invest in a Canadian business ever again, because the tax burden is too high, but the risk, the business risk, is exponentially higher than that, because the government gets to choose who gets to live or die. And that was really what happened to small business during COVID, because there was a massive hypocrisy. Going back to like a funeral, 10 people, right?
Yeah.
And you had,
sometimes it was 20.
Unless we held that funeral in a Costco, we could have had as many people in that Costco altogether.
And look, different levels of government made different decisions, and
right.
I was part of my company is one of the at the time was one of the companies advocating for certain things to be open. In fact, as many clients we can get to keep things open. So we just fundamentally didn't believe in locking down any of it. And if we approached the pandemic in a different way, and this is like woulda, coulda, shoulda, if we approached the pandemic in a different way, we wouldn't have had to have the long lockdowns, the school closures that we had in this province. It's my understanding that schools were closed the longest here in our province. And I know that it's not like sort of clean decision making of each and every government. The province did some things, the municipality, whatever. We could have had a very different approach. And I hope that if this happens again in our lifetime.
Do you think it will?
I don't know. I'm not I'm much better at prognosticating the past than I am the future.
Yeah, just like everyone else. But
sure.
I think that it doesn't need to be a pandemic or for these sorts of measures to be seen again. I think the government has now acquired these overreaching.
No, but you're absolutely right. And they continue to do that. They continue to reach into areas that they have never been into before. You brought up the cases of C11 and C18. There's just bungled pieces of legislation is an understatement, but really authoritative pieces of legislation that allow the government and its agencies to decide in one way or another what you see and what you hear on the internet.
It's fascinating. I mean,
It's not fascinating.
Because-
It is something that every Canadian should concern themselves with. That has never happened in the history of our country.
Right.
They used to govern things like content on the radio and on television to be a certain. They never took on the issue of algorithms. Of course, they didn't have that ability. But these guys cannot regulate themselves out of a wet paper bag. How are they going to regulate the internet?
well, they had things like newspapers and TV, which they did use as a very powerful tool, specifically, basically watching TV and watching the mainstream news outlets, the CBC, CTVs of the world, was essentially watching the COVID Olympics and constant scare tactics of like the numbers going up and inflated numbers, and everything about it in time stopped making sense. It stopped making sense to the everyday person, especially people that were locked down into their houses, that was deathly afraid of, at the beginning, COVID repercussions, and then looking at, well, what the outcome of them being at home for that long is, what the impact was to their businesses, and never really dug out. Big business had much more opportunity to thrive, and some absolutely did. And then small business didn't even have a chance.
Yeah, look, we're facing, moving on from from the time of the pandemic, where the government spent $500 billion.
Is that the number?
That's the number, and $200 billion of which had nothing to do with COVID. Moving beyond that, we've got really, really concerning growth rates. We've got, double trouble in the housing market, double the price of a house, double the price of rent, double the price of the average mortgage. We've got interest rates out of control to try to contend with the inflation, which was driven by the spending of the government. We've got a carbon tax that's going to triple. We've got immigration numbers that are, that have taken our population to 40 million people, and no housing, no doctors, no schooling to put new Canadians in. This is a very different time. And the promise of Canada that was, where you can work and workers can work to get ahead and give a better life to your family, that's the promise that is gone today. And some of that was as a product of the pandemic, and all of that is a product of this government's irresponsible spending.
So what you're seeing is a dance between the NDP and the Liberals. How long is this dance going to go?
Well, it's like any bad marriage. You sort of kind of watch it in awe. There's when you're watching movies, and I've said this before. You're watching movies and they call out into the audience. I've never actually seen this happen in a wedding. I don't know if it doesn't happen in weddings that I've been to. They're like, is there any reason why these two people should not get married? And you just kind of want to wave your hands being like, I have 1,000 reasons why these two shouldn't be married. And part of those 1,000 reasons are the Canadians are suffering as a result. They might as well have made the leader of the NDP the minister of rubber stamping decisions, because there is no opposition there. They are the fourth party that holds the balance of power in the House of Commons, and they let the Liberals run roughshod over them. And it's an unfortunate thing to see in a party that used to represent real values of workers' rights, and they've lost their way.
When do you think an election will happen?
Who knows? When do you think it'll happen?
The truth is, I was hoping it was going to happen yesterday.
I was also hoping that. Look, we are going to make sure that we push and push and push and stand there and stand up as an opposition under a renewed leadership of the party, one that is starting to resonate with Canadians in a way that we haven't resonated with Canadians in quite some time, and I hope that we can continue to make it very uncomfortable for the government. They didn't have a good last 6 months. In fact, the Prime Minister fired his entire cabinet and replaced them with different messengers, but hasn't changed the message. And we think he should have fired himself, but he didn't. and we're going to see more of the same. So if they didn't have a good 6 months, it is our job to make sure that he doesn't have a next good 6 months, and that Canadians know that the struggle that they are facing is a result of this government's failures and this government's failed policy.
So it's ironic that we saw this wholesale change in the cabinet just prior to this podcast. But what kind of message does that send to you, and what kind of message do you think that sends to Canadians?
Well, it's look, up until the day of the cabinet shuffle, everything was awesome, right? The Prime Minister said to Canadians, "You have never had it so good. Right. I have complete trust and confidence in my cabinet." And instead, one day what rolls around, they put out a press release, they go to Rito Hall, and he changes everybody. And he's fired the entirety. We have a new minister of, mental health and addictions, but we still have an out of control opioid crisis in our streets where the government is handing out free drugs. We have a new minister of public safety, but we have a government that hasn't called an inquiry into interference from Beijing. We have a new justice minister, but this is the same policy, continuing on the same policy of a weak a bail system and a catch and release system where criminals re-offend and make our streets less safe. We've got a different set of faces and the exact same message and the exact same agenda. So nothing's going to change for Canadians. I think it might change for those people. Now there's 7 or 8 new people that get a driver and a car and a ministry, but the message hasn't changed. The plan hasn't changed. And that's why we think when your team sucks, you fire the general manager.
I look at it from just, I'm the everyday voter.
Yeah.
And I think that there's still democracy to be had in Canada. I believe in.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, you say of course, but it's not of course, really. It's not of course with the way things are being conducted. It's not of course the way things, I don't want people to tell me what to do with my money, tax me higher, and then give it back to everybody. No, that's what the Russians did. I don't want them to censor information. I didn't sign up for this. My parents didn't sign up for this. They didn't drop and leave everything for anything of the sort. And to the everyday person, if you've lived in Canada over the last, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, how long, if you're a new immigrant, this is, Shangri-La potentially. It's great. It looks great on the surface, but it's not, depending where you're coming from. But if you've seen the version of Canada that existed when your parents bought a home, when my parents bought a home, when your dad drove a cab and he was able to sustain life and put your mom through school, you can't do that today. Let's look at the generation that I'm now surrounded with. I have young kids. I also have an older brother who's got older kids, and now they're in their 20s. They want to have married. They want to get married. They want to establish relationships. And here's the common thread of what they keep saying. They're like, we cannot afford to live here. We cannot afford to buy a house here. We're getting taxed too much. They're now looking at options on how do they get out of here? How do they get out unscathed while they still could? And the only thing that comes to mind is a changing of the guard. And I don't understand how Mr. Trudeau has become the Teflon Don, where he can get away with doing just about anything he wants. I get the dance between the NDP and the Liberals. But when I talk to people on the ground, they're not saying the same thing. They're not feeling the same thing. And the realities on the ground are the things that you have pointed out. What I haven't really heard yet is what is the game plan here? How do you undo all this wrong that has gone over the last?
I don't think it's an easy feat, but you'll see in the upcoming election platform. I think we've been very clear on a plan on housing, on making sure that we reward the municipalities that are getting out of the way in order to incentivize more housing versus punishing those who don't with holding back some of the infrastructure money that comes from the feds. We've got a plan to sell off 15% of our existing housing, our existing buildings. We've got 37,000 buildings. We're going to make some of those affordable housing units. We've got a number of different things that we've already committed to, that we are going to do in order to fix the mess that Justin Trudeau has gotten this country into. And I assure you that that every single day we get up and we fight as an official opposition. And look, in terms of that coalition, we've got to make it sting. The coalition is perhaps what Canadians want, but it's becoming more and more clear that it's what less and less Canadians want. And the beauty of a democracy, like you said, is that in the next election, the voters can make their voice heard and change a government like they have before in this country. And like I said, these things were good before Justin Trudeau, and they will be good after he's gone.
My fear is the complacency of Canadians, and I really hope that there will be a majority conservative government. But if there isn't, and there is a minority conservative government, who does the conservative government dance with to get policies?
Look, I don't think about losing. I think there's going to be a strong national conservative majority government with Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre at the head of it. But there are, depending on what the outcomes are, we are going to find a way to give Canadians what we promised them in the election. So if you're going to ask me on dance partners and coalitions, like, not going there. We're not losing.
I love it. And that's the perspective that should be, because the only way we're going to institute change is with people that believe so strongly in what they're capable of doing and what they need to do. Otherwise, we're going to be hearing the same thing. And it's just like, what used to be a slow bleed is now, death by 1,000 cuts.
There are people that go out and work hard every single day, and they work a number of jobs, and those taxes are clawed back. If you're a single mother and you want to work additional hours, they claw back much of what you're going to make, so it doesn't pay to work. If you're somebody who has built this country, a senior who is living on a fixed income, if you're a young person like your brother's kids who want to get out of his basement and start their own lives and start their own families, and they already have good jobs, you don't have time to think about how you're going to win the next election. That's what many people are committed to doing on our team under the leadership of Pierre. We're going to need a little bit of help from everybody. That's going to be my pitch to anybody
what do we
listening.
Do? How do we help?
Well, one, if you're talking to people who are living outside of this country, you're a Canadian citizen, you can vote, and you should vote, and to give your kids the opportunity to come back here if you don't want to take it yourself. And you've got to talk to everybody you know. Things can get better in this country. They can be better in this country, and we can have common sense policy of the common people in our shared country, and we can bring it home.
The most common denominator that I have from people that are leaving is their disdain for the current government. And what I tell people all the time is that even though we all have left families behind, and what we do matters. And we absolutely cannot forget Canada behind, because it's given us that opportunity to be able to move. Definitely. Because it was that wonderful place that we all grew up in. And once we're gone, it's not bygones be bygones, because it's important that there are thousands of us, and I mean thousands, leaving on a daily basis. That could vote.
So that's one of the things you can do. You've got to tell people that this country, yes, it has squandered its opportunity under this prime minister, but we have enough food to feed the world. We have enough energy here in terms of natural resources and talent and brains to be energy independence. We've got the smartest people, the best institutions. This country has so much potential. It is strategically in one of the greatest spots in the world, with sea to sea to sea, and abundant in terms of its natural beauty and its potential from resources in the ground. And we are neighbors with the biggest economy in the world. Not squandering those opportunities is, I think, what the vision of the next government is and ought to be going forward, making sure that our productivity is high, and that your kids, whenever they're good and ready, come back and choose our post-secondary institutions as a place to study, and hopefully as a place to start their own businesses or start their careers and their families and their lives. So the doors are wide open for them to be able to get what we got from this country.
You talk about education, and it's obviously, it's paramount to every decision that we make. The education front is what I think pushed a lot of people over the edge. Specifically, we got scared that vaccine mandates for our children were going to be enforced. And that's where I think people kind of drew that hard line in the sand and said, look, we're not doing it. I'm vaccinated, but I'm not touching my kids. If, obviously, given the opportunity of hindsight, or given, would you institute a vaccine mandate should this happen again?
Yeah, look, this is a completely thing that doesn't happen from the federal government. I mean, my answer is clear. It would be no. It's not my decision, but it would be no. It would be no every single time. I'm not a believer in mandates. I'm not a. This is an issue that cuts to the core of my belief system. I don't think that the government should be telling you what to do. One of the tenets that you will see us running on is that of freedom, and it is the freedom to be who you are, no matter what language you speak, no matter what color you are, no matter where you came from, if you came yesterday, if you came 10 years ago, if you came 40 years ago, no matter what your home looks like, no matter who you pray to, if you pray on Friday, on Saturday, on Sunday, or not at all. You have a place in this Conservative Party, and you have the choice, fundamentally, you have the choice to live your life in the way that you want to, raise your family in the way that you know how, and be able to do what you want to do in this country.
Before I flew down here, I spoke to a lot of these people that have left, and I asked them those questions. Like, what do you want to hear? What do you want me to ask? Right? And I have my perspective on things, and just the irony is that what you just said about it on a personal level is that the answer is no. It's obviously not an exclusive decision of the government.
Sure.
But regardless of who they voted for, and some have voted Liberal, some have voted NDP, some have voted conservative, but they all left.
Yeah.
They all left.
It's an unfortunate thing to hear. Right?
And it's terrifying for a country that prides itself on, democracy and growth. And Canada, when you spoke to an American years ago about what they thought about Canada, it was like, wow, Canada's amazing. We think it's great, and the healthcare system and all these other things that go part and parcel. Like healthcare was the primary thing that they would say. Now, when you speak to an American, especially in a red state, they're like, whoa, they really got it wrong during COVID. And I'm like, this existed pre-COVID. This existed when they voted for Justin Trudeau to be in power. He just showed his true colors when he had absolute power and evicted martial law to a bunch of truckers. I mean,
Canada is... I won't take my advice from Americans on what they think of Canada. Canada is, again, the best country in the world, and I will concede to you that it can be better. It will be better. That's exactly why I do what I do every day. It's exactly why I try to convince people of the message. It's exactly why I stand up for this community every single day in the House of Commons. That's my responsibility right now, and I will never believe that this country isn't the best country, and that I didn't win the birth lottery by being born here.
Are you worried that the damage that Trudeau has done is too far gone?
No, I think Canadians, are resilient, and there is so much human ingenuity here, and I think there's something special about this place. And I thought if it was too far gone, I don't know why I'd be spending this time trying to convince you on a podcast on a Friday afternoon that this is the best country in the world, and we can fight about it until next Friday.
The irony is that I believe in you. I believe in Pierre. I believe in your platform. And if I don't ask you questions that are hard hitting or cut right to what people are thinking, they might think, because of how jaded people are towards politicians today, that, well, she's just saying what we want to hear.
I believe that we will restore the promise of this country, and I believe that you will follow your kids back one day.
And I believe that I want to be able to have a home here, or at least an opportunity, because tomorrow these red states could turn blue, or something else could happen, or Florida would be underwater, or what, a million things could happen, right? And people have asked me all these scenarios, and I'm not making any claims that I know what the future will hold. No, nobody does. But what I do know is that there is so much damage been done in the psychology and trust of government, the one that we have in power today, that led people to want to leave. But nobody really, at least not the people I know, have not completely cut ties, because they believe that this could be something. I have a lot of businesses in Canada. I have a lot of business relationships in Canada. I have a lot of vested interest in watching this place flourish. But outside of just what COVID has done and what the economic impacts have been, there has been a lot of other things that have crept up during COVID, and things that kind of been swept under the rug, that are mainstream issues today. For example,
we've got crime, we've got opioids, we've got all of that.
Right. So, and I don't even know what the rest of Canada looks like, but I've talked to a lot of colleagues, and they say the streets aren't as safe as they used to be.
They're not.
And why is that?
Well, it's very simple. We've passed laws that allow repeat violent offenders to continue to be out on bail and recommit crimes. And there is no argument to it. There is a stat that in Vancouver in 1 year, 6,000 crimes were committed by 40 individuals. 6,000.
Wow.
So the good news is that there aren't a lot of criminals. The bad news is that they keep repeating the crimes because there is no punishment here. Or there is no, there is a bill that was passed that allows these people, out on bail. So 150 crimes a person. In that, if you take 6,000, 40 people, 150 crimes a person. That's like committing a crime in the morning, like having some lunch, being out on bail, committing a crime in the evening. That is unacceptable. We have an opioid crisis that has gotten markedly worse. So, by the way, on violent crime, we have a 32% increase on violent crime and 106% increase on gang-related violent crime. Every single metric is up in the last 8 years since 2015, since these bills have been passed on opioids. There's no question that we have a crisis in this country. And it's not just in the downtown east side of Vancouver, where it has been bad for a long, long time, but it's in every single community. In Ontario, in Hamilton, in London, all across the coast, and right through the small towns that connects both of our provinces.
Why has the federal government been soft on crime?
It is ideological. It is it is ideological that they believe that they believe that violent offenders shouldn't be punished. There is nothing there. It's not an argument. It is an ideological view of the world. They've stopped the mandatory minimums for certain crimes. That was another bill that was passed.
Here's how I make sense of it: is I think they are going to allow it to get so bad that the only people that can come to the rescue is your government. And they're going to make it so bad that they will come in as the save-all, catch-all, just pay us more in taxes, we'll take care of everything, we'll clean it all up. You stop thinking for yourself, and, that's the only way they
People's lives are at risk on this, though. It's a dystopian view, because in this case, the thing that we are talking about right now, 6,000 violent crimes means 6,000 people were affected. Their families were affected. Right? This is universes were affected. When an addict dies of an overdose, it's not just the addict. It is an entire family that loses someone, a father that doesn't get to go to hockey practice anymore, a mother who stopped, rearing the family in ways that are unimaginable when, kids are young. The uncle, these are people. So you can't play games with people's lives, and they will accuse me. They will accuse me. In fact, I've been accused just recently on this cesspool that is the internet of driving fear in this. But we're not doing that. We're pointing out what is clearly evident to everybody, to everybody out there. There was, just a number of weeks ago, a mother was shot and killed in front of a safe injection site in broad daylight in Toronto. And it's not only that poor woman who was buried. It is an entire family, an extended family. Her 2 kids now don't grow up with a mother. These things have real consequences. People's lives have dignity, and we ought to have a government that treats it that way.
What you show is empathy, which is absolutely lacking. And I think the thing that's ultimately lacking is accountability. It really feels like Mr. Trudeau is walking around like he's got a license to do whatever it is that he wants to do. My fear is that any government, would use the powers that he overreached on and piggyback on top of that to do, what they think is in the best interest of the government, where it should be what's in the best interest of the constituency, the everyday people. We've kind of, I want to circle back to something that is really important here. And you are an openly gay Jewish female, and the first that has been. Sure,
you're an openly straight Jewish dude.
Right.
Yeah. But, anybody ever say that to you?
Actually, a few times. And you are a member of Parliament.
Yeah.
And conservative. Yeah. Did you have any issues being a member of the Conservative Party with your views?
No. We believe in a country that is that means freedom for everybody, and that again doesn't matter. Who you're married to, what language you speak, who you pray to. There is a place for you in the Conservative Party. So I believe that.
I've had a lot of people say that to me. Well, how can she be a conservative and how can she be gay? I said, what does one have to do
Correct.
With the other? Because there is a complete woke culture today that conflates all sorts of different things and then kind of lumps it into what they think is right at that point in time. Whether it's education, whether it's gun lobbies, like they take a point of view and then they think, well, you can't be pro-gay and a conservative, you can't be pro-gun and a liberal, right? And the way I see things is that you brought in a brand new perspective on how a conservative, for example, thinks, right? I think that
I one day want to live in a world where there's no hyphens on people, and you're not described in a news article as part of this community or part of that community. I want to live in a country that I think that we've had for a long, long time, where it's based on merit. I want people to know that the members of cabinet, no matter what party they are there because of their merit and not because of some quota. I want to live in a world free of that, and I think we'll get there.
I have no doubt that we're going to get there. The momentum seems to be shifting, right? The momentum seems to be, at least from the people that I surround, whether I live in a bubble, I don't know. But it seems like there is a trend towards change. People are kind of sick and tired of the same old, right? Now, do you believe that, the next couple of years will yield a change?
Of course I do. I know we're going to work hard for it every single day. And I think that change ends up with a new prime minister, with a brand new vision, one that comes from a very different different life than this prime minister, who wasn't handed everyone, who isn't out of touch, who is empathetic and listens and is connecting with a really new coalition in the Conservative Party. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about what that brings, and I'm excited about the change that you're starting to see out there. And it's undeniable. It's not just your circle. It's much bigger than that. So, my offer stands. You can come back whenever you'd like to help, or you will one day follow your kids back into a country that is better than the one you left.
You can obviously see that you have a passion for what it is that you do. Something that really interesting happened right before we left, that there was the Walk for Israel, and both yourself and Pierre were at that walk. Mm-hmm. You were walking hand in hand with a very strong, very proud Jewish community. And they were, it's an annual walk. There was one recently, and our prime minister was nowhere to be found. Didn't show any support, didn't show up, because what he would have seen is right towards the end of the carnival, you saw a group of individuals that are waving pro-Palestinian flags, wearing a bulletproof vest with a megaphone, yelling at children that are going through a carnival. Okay. Today, I see anti-Semitism. It no longer is veiled via the pro-Palestinian cause.
It's the same.
And it has gotten to the point where if you are anti-Zionism, somehow you can make any claim towards Jews and Israelis, and it's okay.
It's the same thing.
Right? Now, I actually saw footage the other day of, there was I think it was a Filipino event at Bathurst and Wilson, a really nice street festival. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Trudeau made an appearance, shook hands, took pictures, and said hi to everybody, but nowhere to be found for a large Jewish community. And statistically, anti-Semitism has skyrocketed. It seems to me that, like, from an equality perspective, Jews no longer have a seat at the equality table. What is happening?
I think that's right. I haven't seen him at an event in the 2 years that I've been, or the almost 2 years that I've been elected. But that's neither here nor there. This is a government that has funded with Canadian tax dollars a vitriolic anti-Semite. They knew about it. They did nothing about it. This is a government that that doesn't promote the outspoken Jewish MPs who have been good on the issue. There's two that I can think of from Montreal. Instead, they promote somebody who has questioned Israel's legitimacy. Anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, and we are facing a huge uptick in it. And you can feel it in the community. You can see it in the community. And again, like our issues on crime, there are no powerful deterrents for the police or for any authorities to do anything about it. So you see the swastikas on playgrounds, or you see people at a plaza in my own constituency, which, by the way, has no Israeli embassy or anything attached to it. It's just a Jewish-owned business. And when you see Palestinian flags there and a demonstration there right before Shabbat, that is nothing but hatred for a community. And there isn't even so much as a statement from this government. This government has chosen sides on this issue. They've made their bed with this issue. And I think that they've lost the community as a result.
I couldn't agree with you more. And from what I knew, and it's hearsay, so it's not, statistically driven, but prior to you, Jews used to vote liberal.
No, that's not true. We had Stephen Harper, and he was the best, the best in terms of Canadian prime ministers on this issue. And this riding actually changed, and we had Peter Kent before me, correct, who, if you think about it, like, what is like a journalist? Peter just turned, I think, 80 years old, but what is a journalist from a Canadian journalist, not Jewish at all? Like, what does he care about this? Like, he was a believer. He stood up for this community, and I take a lot of, I take after a lot of that. They've always had a champion, or at least for the last 13 years, and they will continue have a champion as long as they'll have me.
Wow, your perspective is refreshing, because it's, first of all, in with the actual times and the perspective. So you have your finger on the pulse of what people are thinking. Now we just got to get you guys elected.
Well, the good news is I love people and I believe in people and I love this community and the builders in it. And I am like so proud and humbled every single day to be able to like have just a moment where I get to be the voice.
I can't leave the anti-Semitism just as it is, because when we made our to-do list on reasons to leave, the uptick in anti-Semitism definitely made that list, and it's a conversation that is had around a lot of kitchen tables over the last couple of years. And what is clearly evident, and I saw where Mr. Trudeau actually, I think he called you a Nazi.
Not quite, but he accused us of standing with those that carry Nazis. And I will say something about this, because I think it's so reprehensible from a leader of a G7 country to accuse any elected member in the legislature, like in our House of Commons, to stand with, I think, the most vitriolic hatred that has ever existed in modern times. Like, I think that is completely unacceptable. The answer is no. He hasn't apologized, and I await by my phone.
Get an apology?
I'll sit by my phone and wait.
Good luck.
I think it's I think it's something that everybody should see, that if a prime minister is willing to go that low, that you know everything that you need to know about him.
I think something you said that most people are afraid of saying, and I commend you and your courage to be able to say it, is that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
100%.
And if you don't think any other ways, I mean, I've had my own personal run-ins, and I advocate for Israel quite strongly. I don't agree with all their policies. I don't agree with any government's ultimate policy. No carte blanche statement can be made to anyone.
Not. Nobody does.
No, everybody tries to do better. But we have a government that is in clear opposition of Israel, and to that, is to me an anti-Semite, because he doesn't stand with the people that really, that are on the front lines. When you allow somebody the leeway to make false accusations about Zionism and what Zionists is, and then they conflate the two between indigenous rights and indigenous people and the indigenous rights of Palestinians to Israel, which has absolutely zero correlation. You're basically saying, I can accept anti-Semitism as long as it reads like thus. What is the party's point of view towards Israel?
Look, the party's point of view to Israel hasn't changed. First of all, the Jewish community is the most targeted group in terms of hate crimes. So we've got an anti-Semitism problem that is growing, and I want to see a policy that puts powerful deterrents in place to punish those who commit those acts, more than just a community that is reporting them. I want to see something done about them. I think that Israel and Canada share a unique bond. They always have. I think that we are friends based on shared values of freedom, of democracy, of the rule of law. And no matter what happens in both of our country, that relationship is very deep, and that relationship will be restored to, I think, where it was when we have a new government in Ottawa.
Look, I really like you don't step away or shy away from anything. You're really on the front lines for all of us, and you are a perfect depiction and a representative for, unfortunately, the people that are thinking of leaving or have already left. I really, really hope that you stand by all of the policies that we talked about. I hope that you will undo a lot of the web that has been done by our current government. I think that there is an infinite amount of potential on this land from every aspect. And it will come from the intellectual capital that is allowed to thrive here and is being stifled at the moment.
Amazing. I look forward to it. I look forward to welcoming you back when your kids drag you back.
I cannot wait. I thank you for your time. I thank you for being able to answer all these questions. I mean, you're an exceptional human being, and I really wish and can't wait to vote for you. And I hope the people listening, regardless of what side of the fence you are, just understand that the Conservative Party is an inclusive party, regardless of what you are, who you pray to, what you think, and wants to do better, because the way things have been conducted over the past 8 years are clearly not working.
For sure. Well, thanks for having me,
You're the best.
Thanks for the team for doing this.
All right, take it easy.